No. Bloody hell!
If your efforts to drive the humble tent peg into the ground somewhat resemble my admittedly overacted efforts, then keep watching, because I've got just the modification that you can make for any tent to get around that problem. What are we looking at here? Well, we've got the tie out loop here from the base of the tent. We've got the tent peg, and conventional wisdom will tell us that we put the tent peg in there and that we pull it tight and we drive it into the ground at 45 degrees and so on and so forth. That's conventional wisdom there. Clearly it would be driven in a lot further than that. The problem with this approach though is twofold. One, it's that age-old problem of no matter how hard you try, at least one of your tent pegs is going to hit something that's, you know, that's just immovable. It's not going to be able to be driven all the way in, which leaves you with the going to bed at night thinking that tent peg's not all the way in. So you might want to maneuver your tent around. You might have to move the whole tent, move it around a little bit, pick it up and move it in order for that to then be driven all the way into the ground. And of course, the age-old problem then crops up. One of the other tent pegs that was able to be driven all the way into the ground has now been moved over to a rocky patch of ground and can't be driven in, because all you've got to work on is kind of that degree of mobility, and ideally it should be pulled out at a 45-degree angle from the base of the tent, so you really don't have a lot of room to play with, and it is always something of pot luck as to whether you're going to be able to get all your tent pegs driven into the ground sufficiently without hitting something hard beneath the surface. The other challenge, which rarely gets spoken about, is you can really only put so much tension onto this as you're driving it in the ground. You can do your very best, and then you clearly go to the other side of the tent and you'd pull that tent tight and do your very best to drive it in, but you don't have much of a mechanical advantage driving it in either with your hand or with the base of your boot or with a rock. You're going to naturally introduce, I think, some slackness into this, and of course you want it very, very tight so that your tent fly can be nice and tight, which brings me nicely on to this workaround that I want to show you. Let me talk you through what you're seeing here and how I believe it brings some advantages. Then I'm going to show you how I actually set this up from scratch. So starting furthest away from the camera, my finger here is inside that traditional tie out loop that comes out from the base of the tent. That loop there is the standard loop that comes with the tent. What I've attached to that through nothing more than a simple lark's foot is a very lightweight line lock, and I'll go through this in a little bit more detail in just a second. So it's a very simple extension there. Tied through that is some 2 or 3 mil Dyneema. I can't remember what it is, probably about 30 centimeters worth. One end of it I've just put an overhand knot in to stop it sliding back through this line lock. The other end I've put an overhand on a bite, put that over the tent peg, and although I'm not going to put this particularly tight at the moment because that tent peg's not all the way in, what you should now be able to see is twofold. One, I've got much more maneuverability with this tent peg as to where I place it. I could place it all the way in the original factory tie-out loop there. That might go all the way in. That might work all the way around the tent perfect. If it doesn't, I've got this fallback position now whereby actually I can move this tent peg further in towards the tent or further out until I find some ground where it can be driven all the way into the ground at the correct angle. That was potluck there. Then what I've now got is I've got some mechanical advantage by tensioning that and tightening this dead end of the cordage there up. I can now really make all of this incredibly taut. If I do that at all 6 tie-out points, I've got a very taut fly sheet. I've got a very taut ground base of my tent as well, which means that everything is pulled as nice and tight as it can. But of course the primary advantage is the fact that this tent peg has got a much greater degree of flexibility as to where you place it compared to just using the standard factory tie-out point. Let me just show you from scratch how I set all of this up. There's the default factory tie-out point there. There's my lightweight line lock. I'm just going to lax foot this through here, making sure get the right way around, making sure that when it's all pulled tight that the line lock is facing upwards and I'm not seeing the bottom of the molded plastic, I'm seeing the top of it. Making sure that's all adjusted nicely. So that's just a simple case of lax footing the line lock onto the factory tie out point on the bottom of the tent. Next thing, take the 2mm Dyneema, about 30 centimeters, maybe 30-40 centimeters worth there, feeding it in and over, and that's the friction. That causes the friction between the Dyneema and the plastic line lock, which means that you can really pull that tight in one direction and slacken it in another. The part of the Dyneema that is coming out on top, put a simple overhand in the top of that, and all that's to do is just to stop it slipping back through. If I'm a little careless one day, as I'm packing the gear away or as I'm tightening it, or I've got gloves on perhaps and I'm not feeling the cordage, overhand loop in the top there, and as you can see that just stops it slipping back through the mechanism. And then on the other end, all I'm going to do here is just take a bite of cordage and put a simple overhand knot in that. Fairly big loop, as big as you can get it. You want to leave a little tail of the overhand to stop it slipping through. But there you go, that's thumb thickness, that loop. Just about to get the thumb in there. Pull that knot nice and tight to prevent any slippage. And at that point then we could place the tent peg through there. I'm just going to adjust the camera angle so that you can see this. I can now put that tent peg in the ground. If I hit some rock or something hard under the surface, I can maneuver it slightly, or I could perhaps bring it slightly closer to the tent. Push that into the ground, make sure it's locked in. Then of course use the line lock to tension that, pull it nice and tight. And if I replicate that process throughout the other 5 tie-out points, as I said just a second ago, we've not only got 6 well-positioned tent pegs in the ground, because we can pick and choose where we place them now, we've also got an incredibly tight tent fabric, because we can adjust and pull. We've got that mechanical advantage of this line lock, which we don't have if we're just using the default factory tie-out loop here. We've only got our sort of physical advantage of our hands or our feet. This gives us that mechanical advantage. Admittedly, this is only the second time that I've pitched this Soulo for real outdoors, but I have to say, if I'm comparing what I'm seeing in front of me now with what I did on my first attempt, this is a world apart. The fabric's incredibly taut. I've been inside. I won't take you in there because it's not the best light to do a video in, but the inner tent, taut but not too taut, because clearly all my weight is going to go on that when I'm sleeping. So that's, you know, maximise the space of that, because it's only a one-man tent, so maximising the space is important. And I've just been up to all sort of 4 poles, and you know, it feels, just for me, kind of giving it a bit of leverage, it feels incredibly stable compared to last time. I've slept in military accommodation blocks that felt less safe than this tent does at the moment. So really happy with those tie-out modifications. Yes, they add a little bit of weight to the kit, 25 grams, something like that. I'm happy with that. I'm happy with sacrificing 25 grams of extra weight for the convenience that it brings, but also the additional value that it adds to the tent in terms of being able to get it nice and taut. Very happy with that. If you enjoy watching this video, or indeed my channel more generally, then feel free to hit the buy me a coffee / hot chocolate link in the YouTube description below. It'd be really appreciated. Cheers.